and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Ladi Akiriduluale. The headlines. Russia and Ukraine exchanged nearly 300 prisoners, including 10 foreign citizens, in a surprise swap. More than 1,000 people are detained across Russia in crackdown on anti-war protests after President Putin's announcement of partial mobilization. And shelling this morning damages cables providing power to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. We begin with news this morning that prisoners of war have been released in Ukraine after an unexpected prisoner swap was carried out with Russia, the largest since the war began and involving almost 300 people. The swap included 10 foreigners and the commanders who led a prolonged Ukrainian defense of Mariupol earlier this year. The freed prisoners were American, British, Croatian, Moroccan, and Swedish nationals. British nationals Aydin Aslin, John Hardin, and Sean Pena, who were captured while fighting with Ukraine forces, were among those released. Saudi Arabia said it had brokered an exchange between Russia and Ukraine of the 10 detainees. In a mediation which involved Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has maintained close ties with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The timing and magnitude of the swap came as a surprise, given that Russian President Vladimir Putin had announced a partial troop mobilization earlier on in an apparent escalation of the conflict that began in February. It came as part of one of the most significant prisoner swaps of the war so far, with 215 Ukrainian soldiers released, including commanders of the Azov regiment, which defended Mariupol. In exchange, Ukraine handed over 55 Russian soldiers, as well as the pro-Kremlin Ukrainian politician and oligarch Viktor Medvedchuk, who was facing charges of treason. President Volodymyr Zelensky said the swap, which involved help from Turkey and Saudi Arabia, had been under preparation for quite a long time and involved intense haggling. Conversely, hundreds of people have now been detained across Russia in a crackdown on anti-war protests across 24 cities, and that's according to the independent monitoring group OVD Info. The group said the figure includes at least 502 people in Moscow and 524 people in St. Petersburg, after President Vladimir Putin's announcement of a partial mobilization to increase the availability of troops for the war in Ukraine. The independent monitoring group said it was aware of detentions in at least 36 different cities, including Irkutsk and Krasnoyarsk, Yekaterinburg, Chasiabinsk, Novosibirsk, Ufa, Perm, Belgorod, as well as Moscow. Moscow prosecutor's office had published a statement warning citizens against participation in protests, threatening them with up to 15 years in jail. Photos released showed that police in St. Petersburg used batons against protesters, while videos showed police attempting to contain behind barriers a crowd gathering at the Ishasky Cathedral amid chants of no mobilization. And the Ukrainian city of Zaporizhzhia was shelled early this morning, according to its council secretary, Anatoly Kutyev, who said that, quote, critical infrastructure had been destroyed and that there were casualties. The shelling comes on the heels of a turbulent 24 hours for the region after President Vladimir Putin of Russia announced that he would back a referendum for Russian-controlled Zaporizhzhia to join the Russian Federation. Earlier, the head of the United Nations Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, said he would not abandon a plan to create a protection zone around Zaporizhzhia's nuclear power plant in spite of Russian plans to mobilize new troops and hold a referendum in the region. Mr. Grossi held separate talks in New York with Ukrainian officials and Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov. He said the situation was getting worse on the ground with continued shelling, and he was now entering real negotiations on the technical parameters to initially create a protection zone, although a demilitarized zone was his ultimate objective.
Now we started with the real negotiation of the parameters of the zone. This is a process which is carried out only with Ukraine and also, of course, with Russia. So this is one thing. Getting an agreement today would have been nice, but you can imagine that these are very complex issues that require perhaps a bit more than one meeting. So, but we are already working on the very concrete aspects that would be required to have the zone being established. What is clear, and this is why I mentioned the number of people and ministers and even presidents, prime ministers that I saw in these few hours here, that there is, I would say, above differences that do exist, there is a conviction that the establishment of this zone is indispensable. Let's be clear, this nuclear power plant is being shelled out. So you need to protect it in some way.
Russia must face, quote, just punishment over its invasion of Ukraine, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the UN General Assembly in New York. In a pre-recorded video, the Ukrainian leader called for the creation of a special war tribunal and detailed alleged war crimes by Russia. Mr. Zelensky laid out what he said were 5 non-negotiable conditions for peace, including punishment for Russian aggression, restoration of Ukraine's security and territorial integrity, as well as security guarantees. His address received a standing ovation from many of the session's attendees. However, the Russian delegation remained seated.
A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the lives of our people. The crime was committed against the dignity of our women and men. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations. Ukraine wants peace. Europe wants peace. The world wants peace. And we have seen who is the only one who wants war. There is only one entity among all UN member states who would say now, if he could interrupt my speech, that he's happy with this war, with his war. And this is the first item of our peace formula, comprehensive item, punishment. Punishment for the crime of aggression, punishment for violation of borders and territorial integrity, punishment that must be in place until the internationally recognized border is restored, until the aggression stops, and until the damages and losses for the war are fully compensated.
Britain's Prime Minister Liz Truss said economic strength in democracies could help push back authoritarianism in her first international speech, as Prime Minister also defending her plans for economic reform as a boost to the free world. Ms. Truss addressed the UN General Assembly, calling for like-minded nations to combat authoritarianism together.
A new Carolean. The contrast between Russia's conduct and Ukraine's brave, dignified First Lady, Elena Zelenska, who's here at the UN today, could not be more stark. The Ukrainians aren't just defending their own country. They're defending our values and the security of the whole world. That's why we must act. That's why the UK will spend 3% of GDP on defence by 2030, maintaining our position as the leading security actor in Europe. And that's why, at this crucial moment in the conflict, I pledge that we will sustain or increase our military support to Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Let's talk now to the Director General of the International Institute of Professional Security, Dr. Tony Ofoyato, who joins us virtually this morning. Good morning to you, Doc. Thank you for your time.
Good morning. It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It does appear as if two things are happening, or well, two sets of things are happening at the same time. On one hand, you have the mobilization, which was announced by Russia yesterday And then on the other hand, this surprise prisoner swap, including some of the key personalities who had been at the center of discussions prior to now. And then you have Saudi Arabia, which had not been in this all along, suddenly making an appearance alongside those who negotiated the grain deal that's talking about Turkey. What do you think is going on?
Well, I think I will start from Saudi Arabia. I see Saudi Arabia using that as a diplomatic tool to become globally relevant, especially as it relates to the present war in Ukraine. Not minding that Saudi Arabia is the ally of the United States, you would also agree with me that he is not a very big fan of Joe Biden as it is presently. Don't forget also that, some years ago, you will see that the Crown Prince of Saudi and Putin were able to, interact much more cordially compared to Western leaders. So if you look at it from that perspective, you see some level of affinity between these two parties. And I think that the Crown Prince used that as an opportunity to enter into the global space as far as this war is concerned favorably. And it's actually a good one, especially in view of the last challenge he had with the murder of Khashoggi, also the journalist that was murdered, and he was fingered, and Western world came all out against him, although he denied it. Since then, I think he's been looking for an opportunity to come all out. The prisoner swap that he was able to successfully negotiate actually put him in a positive light as far as some of us are concerned with respect to the current war in Ukraine.
The other side of it, which was talked about earlier, was the fact that, yes, just yesterday, and I think that's part of what made the swap particularly surprising, just yesterday, President Vladimir Putin appeared to signal that there was going to be escalation by two actions: the backing for the referenda in some of the areas that Russia currently controls within Ukraine as a way of joining Russia, and then secondly, the partial mobilization. One or two of the articles that I was reading about what it meant in terms of the mobilization itself is that Russia will now be able to call upon, at the very minimum, about 2 million reservists to join the troops that it has available for this war, although there have been protests, as we saw earlier on in the program. Is that a high-stakes gamble against what we now see that is currently the situation on the ground, which is that the Ukrainians are on an offensive?
Yes. Okay, let me just also say this with respect to Saudi Arabia and Russia. I want to assume that what Putin is trying to do is also, however he achieves it, get more allies. And if Saudi had been able to broker this and successfully obliged, that means that strategically, Saudi is already an ally to some extent. That is one. Then, what is happening presently, as far as some of us are concerned, is such that it's a power tussle. And Russia, Putin must be seen as being on top of his game. And that is why, having been able to establish the fact that the Western world are fully in support of the Ukrainian president, he sees the reservists as one strategic means through which he will be able to cage or be able to take over. You know that recently the Zelensky has been able to recover some of the states with the help of Western world, the funding, the provision of the arms, the ammunition, strategic operation, to the extent of even having soldiers from other countries coming to fight in favor of Ukraine. So you see all the Western world coming out. It's only Putin as it is now that is standing alone. So he needs the like of Russia, the North Korea, the Chinese, and all other allies that he could convince as much as he could convince. And don't forget that the Russians, too, many of them are not too enthusiastic about the war, because if you ask them what is the essence of the war, they just see it as an overambitious expansionist policy of Putin. So that's why you see that many of them are protesting. The reservists, from what we have seen, some of them are as old as 60 years and above that have fought war, and they are tired. They are already in their retirement, and Putin is trying to pull them out because the military strength of Russia presently is about 1 million. And out of that 1 million, I think he is looking at a bigger picture. So it's too early for him to be using his strategic military force to fight such a war. He never expected that the war was going to last this month. From February, he was just thinking that within 1-2 weeks, it would be an operation successful, and he would have been able to at least bend Ukraine to his own submission. Unfortunately, the Western world came all in support of, not minding whatever had come in support of Ukraine. And that is why now this is the 7th month and still counting. So Russia is a little bit surprised. But to minimize, the depletion of the Russian force, and that's why he had to bring in the reservists, so that those that are strategically trained, the truth is that Putin is preparing for something bigger than that. And he has said it expressly. He was not pretentious about the fact that if Western world come all out against him, he's most likely going to use whatever it takes to defend his nation's territorial integrity. And strategically, if you look at what he's trying to do with the referendum, as far as I'm concerned, he's trying to make sure that he legitimizes, the occupation of such cities. So because if now he has appointed pro tem leaders in the city, now he's talking about referendum for the cities. Now, if a referendum is conducted under his watch, of course, you and I know the result of the referendum. Now, if officially, illegally, those cities are now part of Russia territory. Now, NATO begins to have a strategic problem, because if it is established that the referendum was conducted and the people said, okay, we want to go with Russia, now it does not make any difference whether it was legal or illegal. Now, a referendum has been conducted. Now, whatever is being done there will be seen as, a direct confrontation on the nation called Russia. I think that is strategically what he's doing. And NATO itself is not very enthusiastic about war, because they know the implication of war. Ukraine is a seat for nuclear armament and nuclear whatever. So the radiation and like President Zelensky said, there's no vaccine for radiation for presently. So if it happens and it's hit, all of them will suffer. I just pray that it will not even come back to African region here. So the best thing, that's why you see that the United Nations is looking at a way to protect and ensure that those areas are well controlled and well protected as far as they think they can protect such area, because it will have a boomeranging effect. And Russia is ready to do, knowing full well that they are alone in this battle, and the only thing they can do to make sure that they put the NATO in check is to threaten them with maximum force. And that's why you see that as far as Putin is concerned, if it means, destroying or, as many people as possible, I think he will not hesitate to do it. And I think that he's not pretentious about what he has said.
Indeed, he isn't, and we'll be keeping a very sharp eye on that. Dr. Tony Foyerton, Director General, International Institute of Professional Security, thank you for your time this morning.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you so much.
Still to come on the program, North Korea denies selling weapons to Russia. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. The fallout of the war between Russia and Ukraine, and amidst the threat of fresh unrest in the Kosovo region, Serbia's leader has appealed for international sympathy by comparing his country's plight to that of Ukraine. He made the plea during his address to the United Nations General Assembly. One of the mission commanders said NATO had brought in reserve troops assigned to its KFOR peacekeeping mission to Kosovo for training as the deadline approaches in a spat between the Serbian minority and the government that may spark fresh unrest. Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić took it directly to the audience.
Integrity of all UN member states, including, of course, territorial integrity of Ukraine. In such a way, we behaved responsibly and seriously in this renowned institution. Nevertheless, we could hear from many speakers the stories about aggression and violation of territorial integrity of Ukraine. Many say that this was the first conflict on the European soil after the World War II. But the truth that the territorial integrity of a country in Europe, Serbia, as a matter of fact, which did not attack any other sovereign country, was violated, is constantly unspoken. We ask for a clear answer to the question I've been asking my interlocutors, leaders of many countries for years. What is the difference between the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine and sovereignty and territorial integrity of Serbia, which was grossly violated and for which you provided international recognition and legitimacy, at least some of you? Nobody has ever provided a rational answer to this question. Let me remind you, Serbia has not stepped its foot on someone else's territory, never ever, nor has it endangered territorial integrity of a single sovereign state. It has never happened.
Latvia's President Egils Levits has called for a special tribunal to investigate what he called the crime of aggression by Russia against Ukraine. Speaking at the UN General Assembly, Mr. Levits also said Russia should have to pay reparations to Ukraine after the conflict was over. He said the proposed tribunal could form part of an international reparations mechanism. The Rome Statute lays out crimes of aggression which relate to the planning, preparation, initiation, or execution of unlawful military acts by one state against another. Neither Russia nor Ukraine are parties to the statute. Levits also called for reform of the UN Security Council, saying Russia's invasion of its neighbor once again confirms that a meaningful reform of the UN Security Council is necessary. Russia is one of 5 permanent veto-wielding members of the Security Council.
I call for the establishment of a special tribunal. The main task of the special tribunal would be to investigate the responsibility of the Russian state in the crime of aggression. After the war, Russia will have to pay reparations to Ukraine for damages. The special tribunal could be part of an international reparations mechanism. The special tribunal could be established on the basis of a resolution of the General Assembly by another international organization or a group of like-minded states. The aggression by a permanent member of the UN Security Council against another UN member state undermines the basic principles of the multilateral system that we have been building for decades. This situation once again confirms that a meaningful reform of the UN Security Council is necessary.
And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has condemned Russian President Vladimir Putin's military mobilization order and threats to use nuclear weapons, adding that Ottawa remains steadfast in its support for Ukraine. Mr. Trudeau told reporters in New York that Canada would continue to support Kiev by strengthening its sanctions on Russia and sending military aid to Ukraine.
Canada condemns Putin's irresponsible escalation of the war, his partial military mobilization, his nuclear threats, as well as Russia's rushed referendums to try to annex parts of Ukraine are unacceptable. Putin's behavior only goes to show that his invasion is failing. Canada remains steadfast in our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and we will continue to be there for Ukrainians as they defend their freedom and our democratic principles. Canada is going to continue to strengthen our sanctions. We are going to continue to send military aid to Ukraine. We're going to continue to be there for humanitarian assistance. We're going to continue facilitating measures to counter the global food crisis, whether it's with our expertise in exporting and shipping grain around the world to get it out past the Russian blockade, as an initiative that the UN and Turkey and others have worked so hard on. We're going to continue to stand for the principles that matter so deeply to Canadians and people all around the world, with absolute firmness and solidarity with people in Ukraine, and continue to encourage and be there for countries, particularly in the global south, who are facing difficult times as they too stand against Russia.
Western media reports indicate that one-way flights out of Russia have been rocketing in price and selling out fast since President Vladimir Putin ordered the immediate call-up of 300,000 reservists. The announcement, made in an early morning television address yesterday, had raised fears that some men of fighting age would not be allowed to leave the country. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu said the call-up would be limited to those with experience as professional soldiers, and that students and conscripts would not be called up. The Kremlin declined to comment on whether the borders would be closed to those subject to the mobilization order, and asked people to be patient as the law is clarified. The reports had indicated that flights from Moscow to Istanbul via Turkey, Istanbul in Turkey, were either all booked or unavailable till the weekend. Some routes with stopovers, including those from Moscow to Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, were also unavailable, while the cheapest flights to Dubai are expected to cost more than $5,000, about 5 times the average monthly wage. Typical one-way fares to Turkey have shot up to more than $1,150, with compared to about 1/5 of that price a week ago. The head of Russia's tourism agency said no restrictions have so far been imposed on traveling abroad. And North Korea has denied exporting weapons or ammunition to Russia and blames the United States for, according to it, circulating the rumor. The Vice Director General of the General Bureau of Equipment of the Ministry of Defense said in a statement that ran in outlet KCNA, quote, "We have never exported weapons or ammunition to Russia before, and we do not plan to export them." North Korea's state media condemned the U.S. for thoughtlessly circulating the rumor against it to pursue its base political and military aims, and said the U.S. should keep its mouth shut. Earlier this month, a U.S. official had said that Russia was purchasing millions of rockets and artillery shells from North Korea for use in Ukraine. Rostec, the Russian state-owned defense energy giant, has vowed to enhance its production capabilities to keep up with a growing demand for military hardware and the partial mobilization. The statement came as Russian President Vladimir Putin demanded the defense industry speed up its work under the state defense procurement and acquisition program. Rostec is responsible for 40% of all defense acquisition contracts, producing giant warplanes, artillery systems, high-precision weapons, communication devices, and radio-electronic warfare systems, amongst others. Earlier on, as we've been reporting, the president had announced a partial military mobilization, where the Defense Ministry had recommended drawing military reservists into active service amidst the conflict in Ukraine. Let's talk now to Dr. Tony Agbon's academic and researcher at senior lecturer at the Anglia Ruskin University in London. Good morning to you. Thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, Ladi. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, and I trust that you're keeping well as well. Does it come to you as a surprise, this prisoner swap that occurred overnight, including some of the names that we had been talking about over the last couple of weeks and months, the Azov Regiment commanders and then the foreigners, including the Britons who were captured while fighting? Did it come to you as a surprise, the swap itself and then the involvement of Saudi Arabia in it?
Yeah, to be honest, I would say I'm really surprised. In fact, when the news broke yesterday about the prisoner swap, I was really surprised. But I think, like the guest you had a while ago said, I think we are looking at the Midas touch of the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, also himself also trying to, come into diplomatic relevance after the murder case involving his country, where the a journalist was brutally murdered. So this is a kind of a diplomatic game that is actually playing out. But when we look at it in the totality, it's a good thing, and it's a good sign that at least something is also giving way, despite all the dangers and all the the hue and the cry that we are hearing about the nuclear threat. So, but this is a good step. It shows that things can actually be done.
Prime Minister Liz Truss made her first appearance on the international stage outside Britain at the United Nations after the hosting of dignitaries for Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. And there again, she reiterated her support for Ukraine and the fact that Russia would suffer further sanctions for what is going on in Ukraine. But Russia seems to shrug this off in the sense that in spite of all these statements and so on, Russia is introducing mass mobilization. It wants more troops. Its defense industry is ramping up production of weapons and military hardware. And then on the other hand, it is also turning on the screws against those it perceives as enemy countries, particularly as the coming winter is coming. And energy prices are so high.
Yeah, Ladi, I think for Russia, you agree with me that the last couple of weeks, especially in the last 2-3 weeks, have not been really good for them. We can see that a lot of territories that the Russian soldiers were in control of, there's been this serious push from the Ukrainian military, backed by the West. So there's been the Russians have suffered a lot of losses. They are losing territory, and they are being pushed back. So what I see, if you follow what the Putin administration have been doing in the last few days, is for me is just trying to save face. They know that this aggression has not gone the way he actually planned it to be. He thought this was going to be a walk in the park. It would just, annex Ukraine, but it hasn't been like that. So all what we are seeing now, the mobilization of the reservists, 300,000, the threat to use nuclear power, they are all, for me, it's all the sound of a sinking ship. And I think that we are probably getting towards the end of this crisis.
Many people would agree with the last statement you made about getting towards the end of the crisis. Many people want to see this over. But in Britain itself, where you are, I mean, you're talking to us from London today, a price cap has been announced on energy prices, even though it's not supposed to, or it's not going to take effect until October 1. There's a cap on it. But then some of those that we have spoken to have said that, that even that cap will be quite difficult for quite a number of people to sustain over the period, given other headwinds, particularly economic, within the United Kingdom. I mean, just coming out of COVID, and then before that you had Brexit. So what do you make of it? How do you think people on the street, everyday people, those who are living in the United Kingdom, are coping at this point, and what do they make of this plan to keep the energy flowing, particularly for winter?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. The price cap has come as a little bit of relief to many UK citizens. But we are also anticipating that the UK government, under the new leadership of Prime Minister Liz Truss, will do more. Energy prices have been capped like you said, beginning from 1st of October at £2,500. It cannot be more than that. But when you look at the dynamics of the UK economy, that is still a lot of money for an average UK household to spend just on energy alone, heating and gas. So we are expecting, there's a lot of conversation going on now that the new administration in the UK will do more. What I think is that they just want to see how this current cap they've put out, how it will to go, the impact it will have on the economy, the impact it will have on consumer behavior and all that. Probably they will make some changes. Let me quickly also add that even yesterday, it was also announced in the UK, government is going to be footing half the energy bills, at least for this winter, for businesses in the UK. And a lot of businesses in the UK have also welcomed that. So we see these are just, for me, I see them as ad hoc interventions. But a lot of people are also saying that the Liz Truss premiership should actually, deal with the energy companies and impose taxes on them, because these are unexpected profits they are making due to the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. So that moral question is still hanging. And many people are beginning to have the feeling, and they're advocating that actually should be the way out, imposing taxes on the energy companies, because this capping of the prices for many people is not enough.
Indeed. Dr. Abrons, thank you so much for your time. We wish those of you who are preparing for the coming winter well, especially against this background of what we've been talking about. And we'll be coming back to you, of course, as it gets even closer to see how things are. And as you pointed out, to see how the Liz Truss administration meanders through all of this in the coming days. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Ladi.
The pound has hit a new 37-year low against the dollar after Russia accused the West of, quote, nuclear blackmail, raising fears that the Ukrainian war could, in fact, further escalate. The comments unnerved traders, pushing them towards safer investments such as the dollar. The pound briefly touched $1.13, its lowest since 1985, before regaining some ground. The fall also came after UK figures showed borrowing costs hit a fresh record for August as inflation soared. The US Central Bank has already raised interest rates 4 times this year to battle inflation. The Bank of England has also put up its interest rates. Raising rates, increasing the cost of borrowing and encouraging people to spend less, which could cool rising prices. However, central banks face a tough balancing act because higher rates may also slow the economy. And the Bank of Russia has recommended that banks and microfinance providers grant payment holidays on loans to military reservists called up under President Vladimir Putin's decree on partial mobilization. According to the regulator, such citizens can apply to their banks or MFMs for a pause in payments or a reduction in their size for all types of loans, including mortgages, for the period of mobilization. In addition, the CBR recommended not to recover delinquency on loans from mobilized Russians and their dependents and not to evict them from mortgaged housing in the event of foreclosure. At the same time, microfinance providers and credit history bureaus should not consider such restructuring as worsening the borrower's credit rating. The regulator advised lenders to meet the needs of such borrowers and develop special restructuring programs or adapt existing ones. Still to come on the program, locals tried to save some whales after more than 200 of them were found stranded on a remote beach on the west coast of Tasmania in Australia. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Ini John McQuarrie is here. Ini, welcome.
Good morning.
Yesterday, you talked about the coming interest rates, and you predicted that, like others, you expected that they would be hiked. Well, the U.S. has done that. The pound has reacted badly to it. 37-year low.
Very sad.
The Bank of England is going to do so.
Yes.
That is your prediction as well.
Well, they have between 50 and 75 basis points that analysts are looking at, that the Bank of England might hike. So, I mean, your last guess, I think, captured a whole lot of it, what's going on in the UK that is affecting this. Inflation has been high, even though the last number, it tapered for August, 9.9%. But, I mean, Juliana would tell you, it doesn't feel like there was any form of decline. Any tapering, you know, and it feels even worse than that, especially because of the soaring energy prices, which the new Prime Minister is trying to help, but it still seems like a long way away from that. Another concern in the UK now is the issue of their debts. Their debt is climbing, and what that does, of course, is to tell investors that perhaps this economy is not doing so well. That's why they're borrowing so much, and then servicing of debt becomes higher. So obviously it affects the currency eventually. So these are some of the things that are hitting on the pound. And also Moscow has said they'll stop trading pounds in their exchange from the 3rd of October. So that's less demand on the pound, you know, making it redundant, at least in Russia, you know. So that will also be one impact that is likely to be feeding into all of the cost of living crisis, inflation, and energy
and
costs.
Russia has a large expatriate community in the UK.
In the UK, yes.
They have a lot of people who live in the UK, and therefore that would come as some kind of a significant blow.
Exactly. So the pound is getting hit on so many grounds, so many floors.
It also doesn't have the buffer that some other European countries have. Of being in the Eurozone.
Being in the community. They just left. So they're now on their own, and well, we'll still see a lot of the energy costs. We still see the rail unions on strike.
They only paused it because Queen Elizabeth died.
Exactly.
And immediately the Queen was buried. They said, okay, yes,
exactly.
She's buried.
So
good.
all of this is adding to the pressure of the cost of living, and it's not helping matters from any perspective.
And you talk about the debt.
You know, to make it worse also, because of, you know, the dollar is dominant. So because of that hike by the Federal Reserve yesterday, even before then, we talked about how the dollar was gaining.
Yes.
So once the dollar is gaining, compared to it, every other currency is going down. So the pound also got hit on that front also. So that also added to one of the factors that let it down. Even the other currencies also felt it. The euro also fell because of that. The rupees also fell because of that. I think some days ago, the Lebanese currency also fell because of that. So currencies are getting hit, but the pound, at least in that zone, seems to be the worst hit at this time.
Dr. Agbons, that was what I was trying to make reference to, incidentally. Dr. Agbons, my last guest who you referenced, also pointed out that the British government has undertaken that it will pick up half the bills for the industries.
Yes.
You know, during this period.
Exactly, for 6 months.
That's right.
Yes.
So that's further escalating the debt. I was going to make reference to that when you were talking about the British debt. They're coming out of, they have a bill from exiting the Eurozone.
The Eurozone.
They're
still dealing with Brexit issues, dealing with unemployment, dealing with production, because companies are also complaining. Most of those non-British who used to do, you know, the smaller jobs to help production. Remember the truck drivers the other time? The other time they also had a fuel scarcity because of truck drivers. So they still
because many of those truck drivers were coming from other parts of Europe.
Yes, and now they need papers and visas and do a lot of documentation. So they still have issues coming from Brexit that is still hitting the economy, and then now they have the war and energy crisis.
The market situation How have the markets been impacted?
And the markets have not been looking, they've not been looking good. I mean, since we started talking about the Federal Reserve will meet and make a decision, and then analysts came up to say it to be between 50 and 75 basis points, the markets have been reacting negatively. Crypto has been in red, Bitcoin has gotten hit, S&P 500 have been down. Now that they have been reacting negatively to it. In Nigeria, if I could mention that.
Yes, please.
In Nigeria, we managed to get to slim red, I think, on Monday or Tuesday. But after that, we have joined the bandwagon. We're back in the red. And everybody's looking for a hedge, but I don't know where that hedge will come from.
And of course, we are also facing some economic headwinds like many other people.
Exactly.
We're battling inflation. We're battling low productivity. We're battling high
insecurity.
And all of that.
And then we have our politics. The election is also a major factor of uncertainty to investors that is making investors hold back because they're watching to say, where's it going to be?
Where's it going to
where's
the pendulum going to swing?
Even when it's an administration, we have the issue of policy somersault in Nigeria. Not to mention when we're expecting a new administration, we don't know which way it will go.
It'll go. All right, Ini, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Ini's up right after this program on Business Morning and later on Business Incorporated with the roundup from around the world. Look at the sports from out of here. Ukraine midfielder Taras Stepanenko claims the absence of many of the country's league stars like Alexander Zinchenko and Vitaly Mykolenko made it difficult for the team as it lost to Scotland 3-0 in the UEFA Nations League. Scotland took control of Group B1 thanks to goals from John McGinn and substitute Lyndon Dykes at Hampden Park. And afterwards, Mr. Stefanenko said this was a really difficult game because we didn't have our crucial players and some of our younger players had to play. When you don't have players like Zinchenko and Mykolenko, it's going to be difficult in a high-intensity match like this. With the loss, second-placed Ukraine are now 2 points off top ahead of their next two games against away in Armenia and Scotland at home. And finally on the program, while others are battling various scores, 200 whales have been found stranded on a remote beach on the west coast of Tasmania, Australia. Half of the pod, thought to be pilot whales, are believed to still be alive. Rescuers are being sent to the area. It's unclear what caused the whales to beach on a sand flat at the entrance to Macquarie Harbour, the same remote location where Australia's worst stranding occurred 2 years ago. It comes a day after a separate mass stranding in other Tasmania. The incident saw 13 young sperm males found dead on King Island in the Bass Strait. Experts were planning a rescue of the 230 whales discovered, but Tasmania's Department of Natural Resources and Environment said the operation would be complex due to the location. Macquarie Harbour is a large, shallow inlet in a rural area. Locals have been covering the stranded whales with blankets and pouring buckets of water over them to try to keep them alive.
And those ones that have survived, which we've got approximately 35 surviving animals out on the beach, and the primary focus this morning will be on the rescue and release of those animals. Unfortunately, we do have a high mortality rate out on this particular stranding. That's predominantly due to the exposed conditions out on Ocean Beach.
I think it's inevitable that we may lose a few more. These animals have been stranded now for over 24 hours. They are in a really highly exposed, stressful location. They're not semi-buoyant as they were last time, with cool water around them and supporting them. So it's a much more challenging environment for those animals. They are stressed. They're highly social, so they're communicating to each other. They're just so far out of their natural environment. It is always confronting. I guess our focus now is getting the job done and making sure that we can do it efficiently, safely, and have the most chance of success. So that's the focus now.
Wish them the best of luck in getting as many of them alive as possible. That's where we wrap up the program this morning. I'm Ladi Akere Dolwale. Thank you for your time. There's an update at 5. in the world today. Do watch out for that. To have yourselves a pleasant afternoon. Good morning.